vice president thirsts for the approval of Groypers, people primarily driven by their insatiable need to blame Jews for all the world's ills. Just as spineless progressives will say or do anything to get a pat on the head from Zohran Mamdani, Vice President J.D. Vance seems to be crafting his every utterance for the plaudits of Tucker Carlson and the Groyper right. I don't think Vance shares their viewpoint, but what the vice president lacks in conviction, he more than makes up for in pandering to the conspiracy theorists of the Twitter sphere.
Israel is trying to undermine the United States. Little tiny Israel is trying to undermine the United States. Our greatest ally fought next to us, shoulder to shoulder at war. Now they're our biggest enemy. They have influencers in America, don't you know? Paid influencers. I'd like to know who these paid influencers are.
So Israel firsters like Batya Ungar-Sargon and Mark Levin are still furious with our Vice President J.D. Vance for calling out an Israeli Psyop on the Joe Rogan Experience. But we've just learned even more about that Psyop thanks to a deep dive from the Wall Street Journal of all places, okay? So if you need a very, very quick refresher, here is this. So last week, Time wrote an article about how Brad Parscale, who has registered as a foreign agent, by the way, is operating a pro-Israel influence campaign. And that has drawn the ire of both the Israeli government and the American government. The Israelis are mad that the scheme isn't working the way they apparently want it to work, given that the country's popularity continues to plummet to an all-time low. We've never seen disapproval for Israel like we're seeing today. And the Trump administration is mad because all of the pro-Israel influencers came out against the US-Iran Memorandum of Understanding. So that helped to sabotage the very, very short-lived peace. So now J.D. Vance has discussed the pro-Israel influence operation on Joe Rogan's show. So now that has gone out to all the millions of people who still listen to Joe Rogan. And he is now being labeled an anti-Semite for acknowledging its existence. So before we go any further, Waz, what are your initial thoughts on all of this so far? It's kind of crazy that J.D. Vance is on Joe Rogan talking about all this.
I think JD Vance has aspirations beyond his term as vice president. He wants to run for president himself one day. And, he's kind of licked his finger and seen which way the wind was blowing, what direction it's going. And it's obviously on both sides of the aisle at this point, especially generationally for Republicans, younger Republicans, and pretty much every single demographic of Democrats are anti-Israel, like they just are. And I think JD Vance is trying to get ahead of that because he's affiliated with a White House that's probably the most pro-Israel White House in the history of our country, in the history of Israel. And so, it's not hard for a guy with even half, a brain of political savvy to see like, all right, man, I need to distance myself from this nation that's becoming a pariah throughout the entire world and especially in our own country.
Yeah, it is interesting to see him go so obviously against the rest of the White House and against Donald Trump. Clearly, he is reading some kind of polling that they are not reading, or he's at least acknowledging it. And he's trying to really get to the younger generations if he's talking about all of this on Joe Rogan's show. But the Wall Street Journal did recently publish this piece. And then here's the headline. It says, Israel's $50 million experiment to change US public opinion. The Israeli government is trying to shore up its US reputation with help from influencers, Trump insiders, and millions of AI-driven texts. Okay, so not all of the information contained in this piece is new. For example, we've known for some time that the Israeli government has devoted $700 million to its budget for Hezbollah in 2026. What is that? $700 million, okay? But it's worth reviewing what we already know, along with all these new revelations from the expose. So here's what it said. Israel has retained at least 6 firms to help with the effort in the US over the past year. 36 new people, many of them marketing professionals, have registered as foreign agents for Israel. The country is on track to spend more than any other on US influence disclosed with the federal government this year, and that's according to Nick Cleveland Stout, a researcher who studies foreign lobbying at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. So the Wall Street Journal gave the following example of an influence operation that was drafted but was never formally executed. So a group called Show Faith by Works filed documents with plans to send pro-Israel messages specifically to megachurch attendees and Christian college students, saying it could reach some 4 million of them in the Southwest through a geofencing campaign. The group, created last July, said the work would involve positive associations with the nation of Israel while linking the Palestinian population to extremist fashions, and would cost more than $3 million. So I don't think it's anyone's surprise that they decided to target churchgoers in churches. People who go to church, they're already very pro-Israel for reasons that are, I guess, make sense. They're in the Bible. I don't know, but they seem like a very vulnerable population. They would be easy to be influenced in this way, and it does seem to be working to an extent. But there were other influencers who were involved as well outside of churches. So the effort includes creating websites, posts, and links to pro-Israel content that are designed in part to trigger more positive results about the country on AI chatbots like Claude or ChatGPT. If you have to do so much just to get people to like you, perhaps you're just unlikable. Maybe just try to be nicer to people. Maybe stop doing genocide. People don't like that typically. And it is suspected that the Israeli government is even paying for automated text messaging services that attempt to educate random Americans about the importance of the US-Israel alliance. I can't imagine getting a text like that on my phone. I don't know what I do. Unfortunately for the Israeli government, though, their efforts have yet to bear fruit, and that is very fortunate for the rest of us. So some 60% of American adults now have an unfavorable view of Israel, according to a March poll by Pew Research. And as I mentioned earlier, that is perhaps the most amount of Americans that have ever had or held a disapproval, a disfavorable view of Israel, at least in my lifetime that I can think of, and Israel is not that old, so probably of all time, this is the first time that Americans have actually been able to see a lot of what is going on in Israel and surrounding areas. We saw what they did in Gaza and the West Bank. We see them now in Lebanon even, and they have said that they're going to continue these expansive efforts, and they're doing so without any kind of remorse. We are going to talk more about Israel later on in the show, as I'm sure is not a surprise to anyone. But Waz, what are your thoughts on how concerted this effort is? And it's also like you're doing too much because nobody likes you.
Yeah, it feels like what they're doing is trying to shore up the last bit of support that they do have, which, they got the evangelical Zionist base, like these people that think that God or Jesus is gonna come back when the Jews inhabit Israel or whatever is kabuki nonsense they believed. And other people on the right who are just on board with whatever Donald Trump's doing. It seems like they're just trying to shore up their remaining support. I think the problem for them is not that they think that this is some kind of public relations problem, or the only real problem are these virulent anti-Semites who want to see all the Jews of the world rounded up and killed. But the problem for them, that's just not the case. Yes, of course, there's some anti-Semitism out there. That's definitely part of this backlash. But to me, by and large, it feels like most of the anti-Israel sentiment is just based on their actions. That's what they do. That's the one thing they don't want to change. Your Q rating has gone down in accordance with the brutality that they've carried out that war, or if you could even call it that, a war in Gaza. And so if you're not willing to change how you're prosecuting, that occupation over there, I don't know why they would think getting some dudes to tweet stuff and, AI chatbots to be more favorable in their sort of coverage of you is just nuts to me.
Yeah, and this comes up quite a bit, when the obvious solution is just, be more likable. Stop doing all these things that make people not like you. But instead, they're like, no, that's not an option. We're gonna continue to do all of these terrible, heinous things, and we're gonna continue to do it on camera in an age of social media when the world is more connected than ever in this particular specific way. And so we're just gonna do all this other stuff to try and counter all of that, Stopping the genocide is not an option, so we'll just do ChatGPT and church and social media campaigns to just try and make people like us more, but it's not working. And that is very comforting because today I feel like people are so easily fooled. People don't know what to believe all the time. They don't know what's real and what isn't. And so it is comforting that it is not working the way they want it to. And it feels also very similar to the way the Republican Party overall, and you could say for the Democrats too, the way that they both operate. They refuse to just give the American people the things that they're asking for, the things that they even campaigned on. And instead they have to go on all kinds of offensive and like this runaround. Like it would be a lot easier if Donald Trump just released the Epstein files, but he won't do that. So we have all this other stuff that he's doing instead. So it's all just like very similar tactics. I'm just drawing parallels, okay?
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.